What did I tell you guys about online dating? What's up, y'all? It's your girl, and I'm back with another story time. Let's get into it. This is Zachary Mills, age 21. He has been charged with first-degree felony of aggravated kidnapping. Allegedly, according to reports, he met this woman on Bumble, and over a span of 5 days, he held her captive. After communicating on Bumble, they started a romantic relationship, and she agreed for Mills to come pick her up from her apartment complex on December 24th. After Mills picked her up, he drove her back to his apartment complex, and then as soon as they entered that apartment complex, he wanted to get intimate with her. But when she denied his sexual advances, he started punching her, and he bit her on her face and her neck. It gets worse. As the beating continues, he used a screwdriver handle and continued punching her in the head when his hand got tired from hitting her. The woman told investigators that she attempted to leave so many times, but he kept her inside his apartment complex and continued to assault her. For the 5 days that woman was held captive, he did not give her no food or no water. Eventually, the lady was able to escape his apartment complex after Mills left to go to his father's house. She told investigators that she grabbed her clothes, she ran out the door, and the first people that she came in contact with, she asked them for help. She was left with severe bruising to both eyes, bite marks, and cuts to both her throat and her nose. Severe bruising to the majority of her body. According to a report, Mills was booked and arrested into Harris County Jail, where he posted a $50,000 bond. Additional charges may be filed at a later time as the investigation continues. I told you guys, do not do online dating. Some people get lucky, but not everybody. I'm glad she made it out of this alive, but hopefully you guys learned something from this.
This little girl got revenge on her killer from beyond the grave. On the 25th of January 2005, Katie Coleman finished school and went back to her home in Indiana, United States. Katie was 10 years old and lived with her mum and dad and sister. At 3 p.m. that day, her mum asked her to go to the dollar store to get toilet roll. Now, Katie knew the area well and it wasn't really far to go. After getting the toilet roll from the shop, Katie stopped at the bank to get a lollipop for her way home. However, when Katie's dad returned home, the little girl still wasn't back. Her parents called police and a few days later an Amber Alert was issued. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen a girl who looked like Katie in a truck. The driver was described as a skinny white man about 6 feet tall with short dark hair and fair complexion. Tragically, 5 days after going missing, Katie's body was found. It was in a creek just a few miles from her home. Disturbingly, her hands and feet were tied and she had been SA'd. It was determined that her cause of death had been drowning. 20-year-old Charles Hickman rang the police to confess. He said he and another man had abducted Katie after she'd witnessed a substance deal. He said they tried to scare her into not saying anything and they tied her up, but she ended up falling in and drowning. Disgustingly, this turned out to be a false confession. This obviously wasted police time and caused massive amounts of distress to Katie's family. Police continued to look for evidence and they did find a cigarette butt near to Katie's body. They tested it for DNA and it matched a man called Anthony Stockelman. Police compared the DNA on the cigarette butt to the DNA on Katie's body and it was a match. Anthony, a father of 2 young boys, was in the area that day visiting his mother. He entered a guilty plea and was given life in prison without parole. But this is not the only punishment that Anthony would receive. Now, Anthony claims that he was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance during the crime. He said this is because his father had died 6 months prior. Regardless, Anthony was imprisoned. Unlucky for Anthony, he was actually housed in a prison with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris was serving a sentence for burglary and was in the same wing as Anthony. Jared forcibly tattooed the words Katie's Revenge across Anthony's forehead. He wanted to brand Anthony for life for killing his young cousin.
Imagine being murdered by your best friends because they were jealous of you. Michelle Missy Avila was from San Fernando Valley, California. She was described as a popular girl in her school. She was known to be extremely beautiful and outgoing, but because of this, she got a lot of attention from the boys, and therefore a lot of the girls in her high school made fun of her and bullied her because they were jealous of her. Michelle did have a really good friend named Karen Severson. Karen and Michelle had been friends since they were 8 years old, and this was about the time they were 16. Karen would constantly stick up for Michelle and even get into fights to protect Michelle when she was getting bullied. Now, Karen was also picked on a lot, but for other reasons than Michelle's. Unfortunately, when Michelle kept getting more and more popular, Karen became extremely jealous of her and started spreading rumors about her, stating that she slept with everybody's boyfriends and that she was not to be trusted, etc. The girls' friendship started to deteriorate, and they weren't as close, especially after Karen had to drop out of school after she became pregnant. Things got even worse when Michelle started dating a guy named Randy, who was a party animal. He was popular, but was always out and drinking, etc., to the point that Michelle couldn't take it and she ended up breaking up with Randy. Fast forward a little while, Karen started dating Michelle's ex, Randy. It was stated that later on at a high school party they were all at, Karen became extremely mad at Michelle because she saw Randy pulling Michelle onto his lap, and Karen got super jealous despite the fact that Michelle told Randy to leave her alone and went up to Karen and told Karen that she needed to break up with Randy because he wasn't a good guy. Instead of listening to Michelle, Karen got mad at Michelle and stopped talking to her. There was multiple situations in which Michelle and Karen were seen arguing, and one of the worst ones was when Karen threatened to hit Michelle over the head with a beer bottle. She ended up proceeding to do so and then threw Michelle on the ground and punched her repeatedly. Somehow, the girls got past that and continued to be friends. Unfortunately, only 10 days after that fight, Michelle was found dead in a park. Even though this is a 3-minute video, I'm out of time, so I'm gonna go post part 2 right now.
This is a case of 26-year-old Prisma Reyes and how she vanished after having lunch with an ex-boyfriend. On Wednesday, April 17, 2019, Prisma went to go work at her new job at a car dealership. She pulled into work and she was able to find a really good parking spot. However, one of her coworkers actually confronted Prisma and accused her of stealing her preferred spot. They got into a little bit of an argument and Prisma reported this to her superiors and then just continued on with her day. At around noon, Prisma left the car dealership and went to go on her lunch break. Went to go eat at a Tex-Mex restaurant, and she actually went to go eat with her ex-boyfriend Ryan. They enjoyed some food and drinks together, and after a while, Ryan left the restaurant. However, some witnesses say that Ryan and Prisma got into an argument during this lunch, and that's why Ryan left. However, we don't know if that's actually what went down. After her ex-boyfriend Ryan left, Prisma stayed at the restaurant for another 3 hours. She was by herself, and throughout these 3 hours, she called her son's babysitter, and they spoke on the phone for an hour. When asked about this conversation, the babysitter says that they simply spoke about her job, and they also spoke about what time Prisma was gonna go to pick up her son. After this, Prisma continued to remain at the bar for another 2 hours until the bartender eventually had to cut her off. They got into some type of verbal argument, but the specifics of this argument have never been released by police. After this verbal argument, Prisma was asked to leave the restaurant. After leaving the restaurant, Prisma got inside her white Jeep Wrangler and she headed in the direction of the dealership. On her way back to the car dealership, Prisma got into another altercation, but this time it was a road rage incident where she pulled on another driver. This driver called the police, but by the time they got there, Prisma was gone. After this incident, Prisma continued to make her way to her job, but then she actually did a U-turn, and instead of going to work, she began making her way to her ex-boyfriend's apartment. Security footage shows Prisma parking her car outside of the apartment building, and she kind of parked her car at an angle where it was kind of blocking an intersection. It seems like she was just gonna park quickly, get down, and then get back in her car and leave. After parking her car, Prisma quickly gets out and runs through the security gate to quickly get in before it closes. Once Prisma makes it inside, she heads over to the parking garage elevators, and that's when we see her pacing back and forth, speaking on the phone. She called multiple friends and family members during this time, expressing to them that she was upset about something. After speaking on the phone for several minutes, Prisma gets inside the elevator, and that's when she runs into another resident of the building. Now, this resident told police that Prisma got into the elevator and that she was crying and that she appeared very distraught. It just didn't seem like she was okay, and this resident says that they don't remember what floor Prisma got off on. That is the last surveillance footage of Prisma Reyes. She never showed up at the babysitter's house to pick up her son, and that's when the babysitter reported her missing. Police say there's no footage of Prisma ever getting inside the apartment building or leaving. Okay, more in part 2.
Have you ever heard of the Clutter family? The Clutter family was the typical all-American family back in the 1950s. Bonnie and Herbert Clutter had 4 children altogether, but their oldest 2 had already moved away from the house. They had graduated high school and moved on. Herbert Clutter was a very prominent farmer in the southwest Kansas area in Holcomb, Kansas. Holcomb only had about 300 people living in the town in 1959. Herbert was married to Bonnie Clutter, and she has a reputation of being bedridden for most of her life, or like a depressed person, but that's actually not true. Bonnie was very involved in her kids' life. She was very involved in the community, and she was very active. She did have some back problems, and so sometimes she would have to go rest, but she was very involved overall and a very happy woman. Nancy was 16 years old, and she was very popular in school, very well liked. She was the class president and just one of those girls that was just loved by all. Kenyon, on the other hand, was more quiet and liked to stay to himself. He was 15. So like I said, Herbert was a very successful farmer, and that meant that he would employ plenty of people. A lot of those people were guys that would just kind of come through the area and just work seasonally for him. One of those people was Floyd Wells. After Floyd left Herbert's farm sometime after, he was arrested and was currently residing in the Kansas State Prison about 300 miles away from Holcomb, Kansas. Floyd's cellmate was Richard Hickok. During their time together in prison, Floyd would tell Richard about Herbert Clutter and how he was a very wealthy man and how he kept a safe in his home that had about $10,000 in it. $10,000 in 1959 is like $102,000 in today's money. Richard had once been the cellmate of Perry Smith. Perry had already been released from prison, and so Richard sent a letter to Perry saying, hey, after I get out in November, let's hook up and I have a job for us to do. So after Richard was released, him and Perry got back together, and Richard told Perry all about Herbert Clutter and the safe he had in his home. They got together an old Chevy and a knife and a flashlight and just things that they would need. They then made the 300-mile journey from eastern Kansas all the way to Holcomb, Kansas. They arrived in Holcomb on the night of November 14th, 1959. Part 2 is up.